Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Allen. When election time rolls around, Canadians rank energy affordability very high on their priority issues. And this is no surprise, as we need energy to heat our homes, or drive our cars, and operate our businesses. But what happens when energy becomes unaffordable? Our low energy costs used to be the reason that Canada was so attractive to businesses looking to invest. But in many areas of the country, mismanagement and political interference have made energy unaffordable, not just for businesses, but for families too. Look at Ontario with the previous Liberal government and its green energy free-for-all, or the Muskrat Falls boondoggle out east. Families in those provinces will be paying high energy costs for years to come. And let's not forget the Trudeau carbon tax. This past April's hike alone added about 2.5 cents per litre at the gas pumps. So what's the solution? Well, if you ask Greta Thunberg, the new darling of the global green energy movement, the solution is green energy. But is green energy, including wind turbines and solar panels, all that it's cracked up to be? Controversial director Michael Moore released a new film titled Planet of the Humans, which exposes the fraud in some of the green energy industry. It seems the green energy eco-saviors aren't all they're chalked up to be. Many activists are in it for the cold, hard cash. After all, there's a lot of money to be made in green energy with all the government subsidies. And by government subsidies, I mean your hard-earned tax dollars. So, what does Canada's energy look like going forward? Will energy costs continue to rise with each increase of the carbon tax? Will green energy schemes bankrupt our nation? Does Canada actually have a dirty energy problem like China or India? Are we just green virtue signaling at great expense? Well, joining me now is Dan Mcteague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy and former Member of Parliament. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, good to be here, Tanya. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So energy affordability, as I mentioned, has been historically a key competitive advantage for Canada. Is this still the same today, or have we lost that edge?
Well, I think we still have the edge, but we're losing it rather dramatically. And I think it has a lot to do with government policies that are really not taking into account the consumer, the customer, or for that matter, the many investors who are quite willing to make a go of it in Canada and to continue to invest. That is bringing and drawing in capital, not just from within Canada, but from around the world. To invest in what is the world's third largest provable supply of hydrocarbons, as well as it's the fourth largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. And I'm not just talking coal here, obviously oil, natural gas, sometimes even gasoline and diesel itself, along with a bit of jet fuel. So Canada is, for all intents and purposes, an energy superpower, but you wouldn't be able to tell given the currency of discussion that we see, whether it's the mainstream media or that happens to be among the opinion leaders, and certainly not in Ottawa, where everyone thinks that we can run an economy based on windmills and solar energy, and all those things are wonderful and fine, but they don't respond to, nor do they provide the bulk of needs of consumers across Canada who need energy in a colder climate.
Right.
And certainly for a large industry that needs to continue to measure up against other nations that have an equal competitive advantage, certainly given the difference in regulation they have on their hydrocarbons. So yes, Canada is in fact a very prosperous place, but a lot of it has to do, and I would argue significantly, because of our abundance, availability of cheap, affordable energy, which has certainly been at the vanguard of Canada's prosperity and its standard of living.
Now, you mentioned wind turbines and solar panels. So when I think of green energy, I think of those aspects. Can you please define for us, for once and for all, what is green energy and what do people mean by that phrase?
Well, what they mean is it doesn't have any emissions. And what they mean, of course, is that it can be done in a way that doesn't use any type of product that has or is derived from those which produce emissions. Frankly, it's fantasy land, because if you are making photovoltaics, let's call it what it is, solar energy, solar panels, or whether you're doing windmills, you do require carbons, you do require cement, you do require a significant amount of energy intensity to produce them. And at the end of the day, they don't have the kind of bulk or energy intensity to replicate both what hydrocarbons do or hydroelectric energy does, or for in the case of where I was from, Pickering, what nuclear does. green energy is really about saying, well, this is a clean way of producing fuel, rather electricity, or the means by which we can run our economy
We're going to
without any
explore
emissions.
that. I've got to cut for a break, but we're going to explore what green energy is right when we come back. Welcome back. I'm joined with Dan Mcteague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Thanks, Dan. So we just before we went for commercial break, we were chatting about what is green energy, and you mentioned photovoltaics, windmills, so on and so forth. Can green energy be produced without using carbon?
No, it can't. And unless, of course, someone can wave a magic wand other than biomass, which is the cutting down of trees so you can produce energy. There really isn't, in the grand scheme of things, anything that I'm aware of, both past, current, and technologically advanced, that would not require fossil fuels, hydrocarbons, or some degree of carbon emission in order to produce. So it's a bit illusory to call something green energy when, in fact, it has as its inception the need for fossil fuels on a significant scale in order to be realized.
And one thing I remember a couple years ago, I ran for a party leadership, and I remember doing my research, I found out that these wind turbines that many of us think are green energy, they're actually gas-fired backup. And I thought, oh, so when they're not turning, they're actually using gas energy to continually turn them when the wind isn't present.
That's right. And it's kind of ironic because most of what it takes to actually put one of those in place require a significant amount of structure, steel, cement. I mean, you have to anchor these things.
Right.
The cable lines that run the power to the transformer have to be done in a steel factory. And so all of these things require a significant input of fossil fuels or carbon emissions to produce. That's not to say that they're not worthwhile. I suspect that on a small scale, it's great to have them. But, to give the idea that somehow you can take a few nuclear reactors and replace it with 10,000 windmills that will last maybe 10 or 15 years before they start to break, I think is really an issue of, really, we're dealing in the realm of magic and make-believe.
Okay, well, getting back to affordability. So Canadians on average, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but based on what I researched, Canadians on average pay about 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Germany, which is one of the biggest green energy producers, again, we don't really necessarily agree on what that green energy means, but green energy producers in the world, they use 46% of their energy comes from renewable sources. They pay 36 cents per kilowatt hour. Is this where
Right.
Canada is headed, or we will be headed if we continue down this green energy path?
Well, look, Germany has been used as the cautionary tale of what not to do. I mean, since the early 2000s, they've been promoting the idea, the leadership on so-called green energy, but it's having a significant cause for reassessment, reevaluation of the German economy. I mean, this is a country that still employs 37% of its energy use comes from coal. This is a country that is seeing significant increases to the tune of some $30 billion a year over year, in terms of prices for consumers. It does begin to question whether or not manufacturing as a whole can, in fact, be viable in Germany, given the high and certainly unjustified and unwarranted costs of these new technologies and renewables. More importantly, they can't respond to the demand needs, the bulk load, and they're not, because of the inefficiency of things like photovoltaics, or we call them solar energy, and windmills. You can't just turn on and turn off your button and say, hey, demand has dropped, demand has increased. They're not predictable, they're not reliable, and it's for that reason that they're not just costly, they may do a significant damage to the German economy. This is what we have in store here in Canada. When you look at here in Ontario, the green energy plan has certainly made life a lot more difficult for manufacturers and for business and consumers. It's also exposed us not just to the irony of having to sell our surplus energy, our spillage, if you will, to the United States. Last year, what, $3.2 billion taxpayers gave to Michigan and Ohio and
Because
Quebec
we
and New
sell it
York.
at a loss. Am I correct?
Absolutely. And we subsidize $5.6 billion every year, because the true cost, at 11 to 12 cents, is in fact nowhere near what we should be paying. So there's significant implications for governments as a whole. So which hospital bed do you close? Which teacher or school do you close? Because you're now putting a lot more money towards renewables that, frankly, at the end of the day, make absolutely no sense. Again, I came from a riding over 18 years as a member of parliament that created the first commercial nuclear reactors in North America. We know what green energy is. We've had great experience in it. Our grandparents built this for us, bequeathed it to us, and gave us a very competitive economy. So we've gone from the lowest costs for hydro in North America here in Ontario to arguably the highest today.
Well, I think, Canadians, we're pretty level-headed lot here. And I think if, there's a project that makes energy sense and fiscal sense and something that we don't mind paying a little bit extra for. But it seems, as you were mentioning, with the green energy boondoggle here in Ontario, that it just simply made no fiscal sense and no energy sense. We didn't need it. We simply sold it at a loss south of the border. Let's talk about the carbon tax when we come back from this short break. Stick around. Welcome back. I'm joined with Dan Mcteague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. And that's what we're talking about, affordable energy. So let's talk taxes. Justin Trudeau's carbon tax has been very contentious here in Canada, and several premiers legally challenged its imposition. Do you see success in these challenges and, again, the imposition of this carbon tax?
I do, and I certainly see that as the tax continues to increase up to $50 a ton, which means for most people, despite the bait and switch, here's a little bit of rebate to cover the cost. When we have colder winters, or when we wind up paying a lot more for groceries as a result of higher diesel costs, which of course are rising almost strictly as a result of the carbon taxes being imposed on them, it's clear that sooner or later the public is going to tire of this and recognize that, yeah, I got my 500 this year for my family, but it's cost me an extra $600 in my natural gas slash grocery bill, over and above the cost of traveling with my gas-driven vehicle, despite its efficiency.
Yeah, I think you're right. Canadians really reflect on what a tax means when they do something they do regularly, which is fill up their gas tank. And we saw the price of gas at the pump drop significantly during COVID. And people are like, wow, we never thought our price on gas, because there was low demand, but we never thought it could go so low. And slowly now it's creeping back up and up and up. And as I fueled up today, I saw that sticker that says how much of my carbon tax is costing me per liter. So it's obviously a factor. So obviously, it's a turnoff for maybe consumers, for families, but is it a turnoff for attracting new business? What does carbon tax mean practically for the average family? And is it just one big scheme, or is there actually some merit in this concept?
Well, there's merit in the concept. You believe we have to reduce emissions, and you believe that the theory being that there's too much carbon in the air is not a good thing for the environment, creates global warming, and that, of course, is a whole segment in and of itself. But Tanya, I think we have to look at the secondary costs, which are often not taken into consideration. Quite apart from the fact that we know that this tax is not revenue neutral, that the federal government is in fact imposing its GST. The province is getting its cut of the retail sales at the percentage of what's 8%. That is not remitted to Canadians. It's not remitted to Ontarians. Same for Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick. But the cost as it relates to our competitors, if it's more expensive to do business in Ontario or in Canada because of the arbitrary raising of the price of commodities and other inputs, then it's clear that some companies will simply pack up and go. And we know there has been an exodus of companies leaving Ontario because of high energy costs. That doesn't just mean hydro costs, which have doubled, in some cases tripled over the past 10 years. It also means that companies are saying the grass is a lot greener on the other side. They're doing a really good job in the United States of dropping their emissions. That's because their government was wise enough to say, we'll shift from coal to natural gas. Whereas Canada had already done that. We were the International Boy Scouts, and we decided that we were going to make that change long before. And then we said, well, we can do better. We'll go back to 2005 and we'll reduce our emissions by a third, which is practically speaking impossible. And yet that's the high standard. That's the test that we've established. And unfortunately, it's going to cost people far more than they can imagine.
So it's basically self-imposed punishment, it sounds like.
It is, and it very has that much to do with the fact that I think many of us are completely oblivious until we see the actual price and realize at the end of the year that we have less in our pockets. And I'm not even referring to what happens in an economy where, despite doing all these great things, we still have an exodus of capital leaving our energy sector because it's too risky a place. The regulations that are being imposed on business over and above these carbon taxes, the potential now, which is in the not too distant future, of the federal government imposing, which most climate economists are completely opposed to a clean fuel standard tax, where you have regulation on top of tax, on top of more
Wow.
regulation, is just the wrong-headed. And I think the federal government and those out there have to take a really significant look at the people and their ability to make ends meet. If they're not working, the cost of living is rising, and they're not getting back to work, and businesses are leaving, revenues are down. How do you propose to maintain Canada's standard of living? It's not going to happen by good intentions and being trendy and bring 150 people to these various climate events. We have to be realistic and start standing up for what's important for Canadians and recognize the good work that we're doing on the environment.
Well, no wonder premiers like Jason Kenney are really fighting this and taking the government to court. In the 30 seconds we have left before break, are these all national regulations, or are there province to province differences on these regulations that affect the pricing?
Well, yeah, some provinces like Ontario decided they were going to bring in the cap and trade. Quebec has one. Of course, in Ontario's case, they never campaigned on it. It's why when it was subjected to an election, as you know, it was rejected. Nevertheless, what we're now seeing is a circumstance where a lot of companies are starting to wonder just how much more regulation, how much more layering on of regulations can we expect over the next few years. There's a lot more coming if the Trudeau government gets its way.
Okay, well, thanks for that information. Stick around. We're going to go to this break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking energy, carbon tax, green energy with Dan Mcteague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. So Dan, we during COVID, many of us were on the internet a lot longer, and there was a documentary released by Michael Moore, who generally seems kind of ideologically left, but he surprised many of us with his production of his new film, Planet of the Humans. And that film exposed many cracks, if not crevasses, in the green energy industry. Do you think the film's claims are valid?
Well, I think they're not just valid, they're a final breath of fresh air, and the timing couldn't have been better. I think for most who had been brought up with the idea over the past couple of years that the real veritable crisis was, in fact, the climate, now confronted a true crisis. And so we were dealing, I think, in an environment where people were a little bit more receptive to the notion that what we have in terms of pandemics, the global shutdown of the economy, is in fact the true, and the tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, who were not just affected but were killed by this particular virus. I think for many people it was a wake up call, and the timing for Moore's documentary. I know he's had a lot of criticism, and that's to be expected, but there's a lot of money at stake here. These folks that get subsidies, green initiatives, who've been browbeaten, who are being, in many respects, in their own discipline and science, told that there's only one way to look at this. It's as an absolute given in terms of scientific certainty, which of course it is not. I think this has been a seminal moment where I think people began to say, maybe we should rethink the way we're approaching this, and certainly not go down that road of climate hysteria. As Dr. Schellenberger has pointed out, he is very much a climatologist and very much interested in promoting the idea of a transition, but he doesn't believe that there should be alarmism and bedwetting, if you will call it that, infused in all of this.
Right. Okay, and then in terms of Canadians in general, we're all Canadian here. Many of us, again, we don't mind paying a little bit more if it means that we'll, preserve the earth a little longer, or if there's legitimacy to a lot of this environmental protectionism, whatever. How do we balance our desire as Canadians to protect our planet, to enhance our environment, but all at the same time maintaining energy affordability?
Well, I think we have to recognize Canada is a solution. We are leaders in terms of technology, in terms of cleaner energy. We don't have to go very far. So you can think of the automotive industry, where a car built 45 years ago emitted 17 times more NOx and SOx, as they call it, and carbon than they do today. Think of the efficiency of most vehicles. Most vehicles 20, 30 years ago got a third of the efficiency of vehicles being produced today. And it doesn't just stop there. Efficiency in terms of how we build homes. But Canada is also a solution. And this is where the the climate agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement, it completely misses the mark, and why Trudeau made such a big blunder in not accepting the fact that we are a solution to the Indias and the Chinas of this world who are emitting, who are building more coal plants, and who are likely to pollute the world, not just with more carbon emissions, but with all sorts of other things. Mercury, 97% of the mercury now falling on our lakes here in Canada are coming from abroad. So Canada has a solution: get our natural gas, liquefied natural gas, those parts of the world. And I think for those who are climate protesting and finding all sorts of reasons to block our resources, I think they have to really understand the full implications of what they're doing. They're actually stifling Canada's ability to send clean energy around the world. We're leaders. We ought to give ourselves credit for that. And we should let no one stand in the way of preventing us from doing it.
Wow. Okay, well, listen, Dan, you've given us such great information today and given us some more thoughts to think about on the green energy file, that's for sure. Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me, Tanya.
Stick around. Like many of you, I used to get a warm, fuzzy feeling when I heard the term green energy. I thought Canada was saving the world one wind turbine at a time. But it appears green energy isn't all that green. Not only does the production of green energy use a lot of fossil fuels and hydrocarbons, it also costs a heck of a lot, not just for businesses, but for you and me, the consumers. Energy affordability must remain high on our government's priority list if we will thrive as an economy and keep jobs here in Canada. Throwing away good money after bad and unnecessary green energy projects is not a smart solution. As long as technology advances, Canada is becoming more green every day, which is in addition to our already stellar rating as a global leader in emission standards. So how much extra will Canadian families be willing to pay for clean energy innovation? And how will you, as the voter, hold this government into account for its seemingly failed green energy schemes? Lots to ponder. Until then, this has been Counterpoint.